right from the top.
Absolutely, mate. Can handle all that sort of stuff, no problem.
Wicked. All right. Team. I hope everybody is well. I'm just going to make sure that we are up and running on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and now we're going to be heading on to TikTok as well, which I'm sure what all the cool kids call it. Hey, gang, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. For this is very much a stream for those of you that are on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Andy, of course, and I am delighted to be joined by Lucas McEntee, who is one of the leading authorities in a space that is going to become ridiculously important in about 20 days time. All right.
Yep.
It's come around fast, hasn't it, Lucas?
It has, mate. You've only got 2 weeks left to launder money. So make sure you keep that in mind, everyone. You can't do it after the
Yes.
first.
Yeah, well,
So,
quite exactly, man. So for those of you joining from TikTok, hopefully you can hear Lucas. But this conversation that we're doing live today is really going to be all about AML laws that are going to be live and active from July the 1st. We're going to go right from the very tippy top because, believe it or not, I know that there's a lot of people that have got themselves educated and got their heads around it, but there's still a heck of a lot of the real estate industry in Australia that really haven't got their heads around it at all. And I was out having a chat with the team earlier today, Lucas, and as soon as I mentioned the 19,000 a day, all of a sudden it really sort of got them paying attention. So we're going to go right from the very top. We're going to talk about what AML is. We're going to talk about why it's come in. We're then going to talk about the practicalities of it, how it affects your workflow. But we're also going to dig into some really important stuff around key scripts, dialogues, key conversations that you need to be having with your stakeholders, your customers, whether they are sellers, potential sellers, buyers, because Lucas and I have spoken about this offline a couple of times. And one of the big concerns that we have is the fact that we've got a lot of people that, because it's a legislative requirement, if we don't handle this with the appropriate amount of care from a customer perspective, then we could end up burning opportunities, burning bridges with customers, based on the fact that we're not able to articulate this in a way that is nice and safe and controlled and comfortable and calm. All right, because Lucas, and I'll get you to give everybody a bit of an MO as to who you are for those that don't know you. But
sure.
I think it's safe to say, man, that these AML laws that are coming in, are very much, I don't want to say storm in a teacup. They're super important, but it's not, as you sort of, one of the first things you said to me is that it doesn't have to be something that people get worried about.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, just a little bit about me. So, founder of Riverstone Partners. Most of the industry would know us as Sale Funder. So, we've been processing hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions since we started in 2020. But we have already been and have been a regulatory AUSTRAC regulated business since inception. So, we've been doing this already for 5-6 years in the background, and now we're offering it to our agent partners. But yeah, from an educational perspective, you're right. AML, people have used a lot of fear around AML. Obviously, the $19,000 fine or $19,600 fine, that is real, but it's not. It's definitely to get your attention, and they will start dishing out those fines if you don't do the right things. But AML, if you think about all legislation in Australia, it's almost always written about the reasonable person test. What would a reasonable person do in this scenario? Okay. Now, from a reasonable person outside looking in, we've been really late to the game in terms of real estate and AML compliance. It's been in the UK for a long time, New Zealand for a long time. We're the last major economy to actually implement AML for real estate transactions. The other two are Haiti and Mauritius. So you're kind of, you're not really, we're all islands. So if you want to think about the last three islands, but the big one has yet to get compliant, and it's a big part of the international body that regulates payments. They're auditing Australia next year, and they need to make sure that we've put these things in place. Otherwise, it stops trade. So a lot of money does get laundered through property. And if you see, anyone that's been arrested or on the news, they're usually confiscating a lot of assets. So it is something that has to happen, and every real estate agency, accountant, and lawyer has to be AML registered and compliant from the 1st of July. So that's the day that's coming up. But it's not that hard. It's just the reasonable person test. What would a reasonable person do in certain circumstances? If you start with that, you're kind of already doing a fair bit of AML already. And I'll talk about 5 of the key things you have to do, and then how our team are helping agents and sales agents breach the topic with their buyers and sellers, and why they need to do these sort of things, and why they need to do these sort of checks, and what to do and handle those objections. We've already been working on with agents around sale funder and how to collect VPA and how to deal with those objections. So we've applied some of that ethos to AML as well. And yeah, happy to help out and point people in the direction after today of where to go and find more information. So yeah, should be an interesting chat, mate.
Yeah, magic. I am looking forward to it, because this is something that it really can't be ignored. I know that a bunch of stuff sometimes comes in, and we can be a little bit sort of lackadaisical towards certain things that do come in. But then every so often there's something that comes along that, you can't avoid. You have to take seriously.
Yep.
But like Lucas said, and what I would hope would happen out the end of this conversation, is that you don't feel anywhere near as concerned about these things coming in. All right. So AML being anti-money laundering. I know that back in the day, in hindsight's a wonderful thing. I know for a fact that there was a deal, God knows how many years ago now, that was blatantly a money laundering exercise, but it was disguised as an auction and what have you. And there was a whole load of Breaking Bad-esque sort of elements to that story. But Lucas, from your perspective, you say that without these things coming in, trade stops, right? From our perspective as real estate agents, if, for example, these anti-money laundering regulations didn't come in, right?
Yep.
And the game was allowed to just keep carrying on the way it was carrying on, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would be the inherent risks to the agents were things to be allowed to carry on the way that they were doing? Like, what would have been the inherent risks that would cause the agents themselves so much harm? Because there would be a certain percentage of the industry that are like, well, from my perspective, all I'm doing is doing my job.
Yep.
As long as it's not harming me, then I don't really care.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I
so,
understand.
that
Look,
degree of separation allows a lot of people to be a lot more sort of arm's length about it, right? But to
yeah,
give us a bit of
exactly.
an idea as to the consequences of what were this to go belly up.
Okay, so just to, again, a bit more context. So there's a thing called FAFT. So FAFT are the international regulatory body around the SWIFT payment process and money transfer. And if our country gets entered onto what they call a grey list, so places like Dubai, Monaco, they all get added on and off that grey list. It gets really hard to do international trade. So
Mm,
Australia left it as long as it could. And then the other question comes up is like, why do I have to do this as a real estate agent? Can't the conveyancer do it? Can't the bank do it? So actually, what AUSTRAC are looking for is just data points. So if you think about the data points that are involved in a property transaction, you have a bank, a broker,
mhm,
a conveyancer. Sometimes there are obviously 2 conveyancers. You have a buyer and a seller, a real estate agent. So there's lots of different data points that the government can pick up on if those things are being reported on for criminal activity.
mm,
And a lot of the times they might only get 1 or 2 people that report something. It just gives them more visibility of where to follow the money. So we've been
mm,
really lucky to spend some time with a gentleman called Neil Jeans, Englishman. He worked for Scotland Yard. He arrested George Belfort. He's a really interesting character. Was the head of financial crime of the National Australia Bank, and now is a partner at Grant Thornton. He prepared these kits for Austrac. And one of the reasons that is that they want the trade to still happen. They still want the person to buy and sell the home, but they just want to get extra data points to help collect and find and prosecute criminals in the way that property is used regularly for laundering money. And that's the reason. So they want to see it from the conveyancer, the broker, the bank, and the agent, which just helps them zero in their resources to get the criminals where they need to, because there is a lot of money being laundered through Australian property, and it's a safe haven. It's really stable. Properties go up, so you're actually investing criminal proceeds as well. And it's been allowed to go on for a long time. And I think when we talk through some of the ways of how money's been laundered later on in the chat, you'll start to think, actually, that's probably happened to me at some point. If you've been in real estate for 3 to 5 years, you probably would have seen it.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah, most likely. And I think that is one key point that we can take away straight away, team. It's not like we are being burdened with the task of becoming Inspector Gadget, right? We're not being burdened with this task that we have to all of a sudden win a game of Cluedo every time we put a deal together or get an offer or anything like that, right? It's just data. It's just touch point collection. It's the collecting of those touch points that allow the higher bodies, the powers that be that do all the investigating, to be able to piece those bits of the puzzle together to really nail these people from doing these things again. Because realistically, the from our perspective, if we kept allowing these things to go on, then sometimes it can completely diddle people out of getting deals together. It can falsify market conditions and so on and
Yep.
so on and so forth as well. Because when we talk about the fact that these things are happening on the regular, it's honestly it's more often than you think. Have you got any numbers around it, Lucas?
Yeah, so the amount of money laundered through just general criminal activity is actually around the world. It's bigger than Germany's GDP, so it's a significant amount of money, and so we're
Jeez.
talking billions of dollars. But I just think, just to simplify it for our audience, there's probably 3 major things that you need to know after today. So Austrac have deemed real estate agents as a designated service, and that means that you have to become a reporting body. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, reading the Act back to front, there's a lot of things in there to confuse people, but there's really one main crux of it. It's if you're in the process of transferring a title. So that's the question you need to ask yourself as an agent: is, am I in the process of transferring title? And if
Mm.
that is the question is yes, then you need to start thinking about anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism funding, so AML CTF. Okay. So question is, am I in the process of transferring title? You're not at a listing presentation, you're not doing that. You're just talking about you as an agent. Or at an auction, when you're having people register, that's not AML required. It's just when you get to the point of transferring a title, that's when you need to start thinking about your AML requirements. So
Mm.
if every time we get given a scenario, it's like, oh, what if I sign the listing agreement now, but they don't want to start marketing for 60 days? So, well, the minute you start providing a service to transfer title, you have to start doing AML. You can't delay for 60 days and do it later. Um, when you're negotiating a property, okay, that's just negotiating. When you're actually about to transfer the title, in other words, signing an authority and signing a sale contract, they're the 2 main ones of when you need to start thinking about, do I or don't I need to start undertaking some AML services, okay? So transfer of title is key. The next 2 are KYC. So KYC, KYB, somewhat the same thing, is know your customer. Who am I actually dealing with? Okay, so know your customer, know your business. If it's a business, you just need to understand, who is it that I'm dealing with here? What's the name of the person? Have I identified them? Are they who they say they are?
Mm.
So that's really, really key. So know what KYC, KYB. There's one other, KYA, which is cover your ass. So always leave a note, always track it, always report it. Okay. Um, but KYC, KYB, who is it I'm dealing with? And then what's the relationship to the actual asset? So are they the legal owner of this property, and or is it their money that's paying for the purchase of the property through their deposit payment?
Mm.
So KYC, KYB, what's the relationship between the asset? Is it theirs? Is it not? Is it in a trust? Are they a patsy? Are they a criminal that's using somebody else to do this transfer? So am I undertaking the transfer of a title? If the answer is yes, you need to think about AML. Then you need to do a KYC, KYB check, and there's lots of digital versions of this that are out there in the market. We've offered one as well. And then there's a relationship to the asset. Is it their home? And or is it their money that's paying for the deposit? If you get those three things, you're very much on the way of being AML compliant, and of course recording it and everything else, which is a big part of what we've digitized through Austrac starter kits.
Yeah, yeah. So that makes it real nice and simple because I think every weekend I've had someone asking me or an agent asking me, do we need to go through the checks with every single buyer that tries to buy the place or every single bidder that tries to buy the place or whatnot, right?
Yep.
To simplify it down to that nitty gritty, which is if you sign an authority, you got to crack on, and as you go to sign a contract, you got to crack on.
Transfer a
Uh,
title. Are you
yeah.
going to facilitate the transfer of a title from one person to another? So
Yeah.
signing an authority to sell the property, you're absolutely going to transfer the title from the vendor to the buyer.
Hmm.
And then when you sign a sale contract, you're transferring the title from the vendor to the buyer. So you're currently in that middle. So just, am I currently undertaking the transfer of a title? There's lots of other little nuances which we don't have time to go into today. But if you just remember that, that's an easy one to ask yourself the question, do I need to do AML? Now, real estate's very, very lucky that actually has a delayed AML component. So if you're a bank, you have to do AML first before you start transacting with these people, or a
Hmm.
lender, and all, you have to do it before you conduct some business. Real
Yep.
estate's been carved out that they've been given delayed AML opportunities, which is up to 15 days you've got to time to be compliant. So when you're doing your KYC, KYB checks and the relationship to the asset and undertaking your checks, you've actually got 15 days to do that from the sign of signing the authority, from the time of signing the sale contract. So again, knowing that you've got the ability to at least take your time and get the necessary documents in place to prepare this properly, there's not really a lot of excuses for you not to be AML compliant if you're a real estate agent. They've really done everything they can to listen to the industry and make sure there's enough material available. But in this downward market, people are thinking about survival. We've had interest rates, we've had the war, we've had the CGT changes. So I can 100% understand that it's not been the, but these fines are real, and Austrac have made it very clear. We've heard this directly from the horse's mouth that if real estate agents aren't registered and registered properly by the 1st of July, you've actually got a 27 or 28-day period to do it within that period. But if you don't, there's $19,600 fines per day. It used to be once off. They just added a day to the end of the legislation just not long ago. So, but yeah, so it is very serious, and everybody needs to do it. That's a contractor or a conjunctional agent, or a real estate principal who runs a real estate practice.
What about, right? And this is just a little bit of a side topic, and I think this is quite good for the TikTok crowd. What about buyer advocates? There's been a lot of conjecture around buyer advocates recently about where they fit into this whole thing.
Mm-hmm. So again, same question. Are they in the process of facilitating a transfer of title?
Hmm.
Are they a licensed real estate agent? So the answer is yes. A buyer's agent has to also to be AML registered. So they are in the process of selling the property or finding a buyer for the property to facilitate the transfer of title. So yes, a buyer's agent does need to be registered. And then there's some questions around being able to share some AML with a buyer and a seller's agent. So those things are being facilitated at the moment. But yeah, buyer's agents absolutely need to be registered. They need to know who they're dealing with, and they need to know the relationship to the asset, being the property or the cash that's used to pay for the property.
What about the auctioneers?
So auctioneer's a service, okay? If you're the one facilitating the transfer of title as an agent, yes. If you're an auctioneer, you are a service provider to that agent, so you don't need to do AML.
What about though? And and it was actually, I know this is a slightly selfish question, but this is absolutely relevant. If we are doing a mortgagee sale and it's the auctioneer that is designated to sign the contract on behalf of the mortgagor.
Okay, so again, if you're acting in the facility of a real estate agent and transferring title, then you need to be registered and you need to be undertaking an AML check. So if the bank has appointed an agent to do so, that's the person that needs to do the AML checks.
Mm.
If you're a service provider, then no, just like a signboard provider or a printer.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but if you're acting in the services of real estate and facilitating the transfer of title as a licensed real estate agent, then you need to be doing your AML checks.
Yeah, wicked. Good. Now, in terms of how we put this together, so in terms of the workflow, let's work on mechanics first, right?
Sure.
So we've already so we've asked so we've got really well highlighted really well here that we've got a point of authority at point of contract. So what are the steps that you would recommend, are best practice steps to do the KYC and KYB stuff? Like, what are the best steps for an operator to take?
Sure. Okay. So KYC is know your customer. And a great way to do that, of course, is a driver's license or passport. But there's a couple of other things that you need to be checking as well that Austrac are interested in. So the two other checks, which are a little bit harder to do unless you're plugging into a technology provider like we do, is to do what's called a PEP check, so a political person of interest, and a sanctions list check. So they're two quite critical components to determine the risk profile of the person you're dealing with. Okay.
Mm,
So there's a place in Switzerland called BASEL, BASEL, pronounce it like they do. Basel is the other way to do it. So they have what they call a risk profile of risky countries around the world. So China, Iran, places like that. So if someone's a national of those jurisdictions, they could be deemed on the sanctions list. So Russia, for example. So things like that. So anyone that the government has put on a sanctions list will be on this back end check. So Equifax is who we partner with. Equifax do all of the major banks' identity checks, as well as a lot of the gambling companies. So TAB, so their biggest day of the year is Melbourne Cup Day, for
mm,
people creating online punting accounts. But so they'll do those checks for you in the background. Now, you can do Google searches as well if you're an agent and you don't want to sign up these services, but it gets harder to know it's accurate, and it's also too difficult to track and keep a record of if it's not electronically done for you. The other one is the political persons of interest. So does this person have influence to change legislation? Okay, and are they actually on a list? So recently, a property was seized as part of a Nairobi ex-general who purchased the property. His wife was on the pension and happened to pay cash for it. Okay, so that was very quickly picked up by the bank that was involved at the time, because he was on a PEP list, a political person of interest, and a sanctions list. So that the federal police managed to seize those funds and repatriate them back to the appropriate place.
mm.
So basically, these people will be on these lists. Now, Sale Funder, we do about 40 to 45,000 transactions a year. So we see these a lot. Okay. So PEPs come up a lot more often because we've actually seen like the nephew of the Lord Mayor of Newcastle come up. So someone not really in influence to change politics, but he's still been on the list. I still haven't figured out how they put people on the list, but he's there, right? And then your plan as a real estate agent will determine if you do or don't deal with politicians, or you do and don't report that person to Austrac. Because if they're on the sanctions list, there will be a high profile. I would say yes, you'll need to report that person. And the PEP check as well might need to ask a few more questions, as are you currently in government and can influence decision, blah, 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 blah. And we can help you with all that. And Equifax actually do that electronically for us. There's a number of ID check providers out there, but it's $6 a check. So if it's for the sake of $6 per person and the buyer and the seller pay for that, it's just worth using Equifax because they're the biggest ID provider in the country. They do the majority of searches. We work with them. It's nice and simple. We're working with a few others as well, but Equifax is our chosen provider. And they'll do the identity check, and they'll check if there are sanctions or PEP lists, which is important that Austrac want you to know.
Awesome. Uh, the message there is you can do it yourself if you really want, but possibly
$6,
not the
mate.
best move.
It's $6. Yeah, Christ.
Yeah.
Save yourself the time and hassle. Any good self-respecting real estate agent should have a mental hourly rate of $1,000 an hour. Okay, so
Mm,
every 6 minutes is $100, right? And if it takes you longer than 6 minutes to do it, get us to do it, right?
yeah.
So every 6 minutes is $100 wasted. So that's the last thing you want to do. Just get us to do it. We do it regularly. We do it all the time. And then how do you raise that with the vendor?
Mm.
I need to undertake this check. Well, we've produced some material to help hand out, and there is more than enough stuff now on Austrac's website to say, look, this is a new legal requirement that I need to undertake a KYC AML check on every person involved in the property transaction. There's one other little thing that tends to be slipping through the cracks is that it's every property that has not settled by 30 June. So if you've currently got 5 or 6 properties listed now and they don't settle by 30 June, you'll have to do some AML checks on them as well. So
I was
this
gonna. That
legislation
was
doesn't start by the 1st. It's the 1st is when it kicks off, but any listing not done by the 30th has to be included in that as well. So you can
so
start to
anything.
warm yourself up to this conversation.
Anything that is due to settle after July 1st, if it's entered into a contract but it's not settling till after July 1, you're gonna need to get this done.
That's correct. AML needs to be undertaken on both sides, buyer and the seller.
All right, well, that's hilarious, right? Because we're going to essentially on signed contracts and committed parties, we've then got to go back and say, hey, we've just got to get proof that you own the house now, like which is going to be a bit odd. But I think that if we
It,
take it with a degree of humility and just say, look, this is a legislation that we knew that was coming, but now we know that we've just got to make sure that in order for settlement to take place nice and smoothly, we've got to have these checks done so that authorities don't suspend any transactions from coming to pass, right?
exactly. So looking at your audience, so anyone in Queensland, that's quite simple. You can look at your Form 2. So your Form 2 will show who owns the property just because the title search will be on there.
Mm.
New South Wales and Victoria, you've got a property that's live. You'll actually have a copy of the sale contract. So you can quite quickly check the sale contract if the name on title matches the identity check. So you can start to send out these emails and inquiries to your buyers and sellers, letting them know that it's part of the new legal requirement. And we would recommend start doing that now because you don't want to go past the 15 days after the 1st of July if you delay the ML check and then fall foul of the regs. So you may as well
Mm.
start getting into it. And again, you can look at the rates notice, you can look at the title search of the property to proof of ownership. And if you see it's in a company and it's owned by a trust, there's some additional questions you'll need to ask as well. But that is a great way to start.
Okay, so it's probably a good idea to start practicing on the clients that you've already got, right?
Correct. Because like if they've sold the home, they're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to lose the listing. You can start to have these conversations to start getting your scripts ready. And this is how we feel it's a great way to breach the topic. Okay.
Mm.
So, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, you may not be aware, but from the 1st of July, every real estate agent, accountant, and law firm has to become AML compliant, which is anti money laundering and counter-terrorism funding. So it's a law that has been put onto all these 3 industries. And just like the banks have had to do for years, where they need to report anyone that's has a larger than $10,000 transaction or anything suspicious, we now need to do that as well. Okay. And as part of my requirement, here's a flyer that shows from Austrac that I have to do these checks, which is ultimately an identity check, and that you do or don't own the home or how you pay for the deposit. And then you just run through the process. Now, if someone absolutely flat out refuses to do the check, um, you can't say, well, I've got to report you to Austrac. You can say, look, this is a requirement and we might deem it suspicious if you don't undertake this check. And every property that hasn't settled by 30 June is now part of this new legislation. And I have to report suspicious activity, and that's part of my job. And once you put it down to it's not me, it's the government, it kind of sort of softens the burden a little bit. And so, look, we all hate doing this too. It's just all extra red tape, you know, blah, 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 government, but it's something we have to do. I kind of feel that the conversation about the benefits that these checks are bringing the Australian community don't tend to resonate as much as Austrac talk about. Like, we got to stop criminals, we get child sex trafficking people, we get, illicit drugs, we get, murderers, all this sort of stuff, criminal activities got to go somewhere. That's all great if you're a policeman or in the courts process, you want to see the right thing happen. Mum and dad, unless it's affecting them personally, they don't tend to care as much. When you put it down and go, look, me as the agent, I'm trying to help you sell your home. This is what I've now got to do as part of my job. That tends to soften the burden a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think that broaching it's going to be an interesting one, right? Because broaching the subject of, if they're saying I don't want to do it, and then I think using the word suspicious is got to be handled with a distinct amount of care, right? Because if we look at the perception, the inherent perception of real estate agents is that we're the suspicious ones, right?
Yep.
And then us having to turn around and say, look, we are now legally obliged to have to report any suspicious activity. That could really turn relationships sour, right? If we try
Absolutely.
and and I think the energy, and I think we need to talk about the energy that needs to be brought with this, right? And I think that if you come at this from an authoritarian perspective, then you are likely to rub people up the wrong way, as opposed to coming at it from an angle of it's a bit of red tape that we'd rather not have to bother doing, but it's some our hands are tied with it. Is it so? Can we if we could get this, they'll get this done as quickly as possible and as painless as possible. All
Correct.
right.
Now, with
And
with our electronic ID check, it literally is less than 60 seconds. So by letting them know to say, look, you're going to get an ID check, and it's going to come from a company called Agency AML, which is a law firm, and it's provided by Equifax. Now, Equifax look after the big four banks. So when it comes to talking about data and data security, this is something as well that we find a good thing to add, as it's a law firm doing it. It's not us.
100%.
And then secondly, Equifax are the provider, and they look after the big four banks. Now, most people might have heard of Equifax, but when you say they're a big four bank provider, it's kind of like, okay, well, if the big four banks trust them, they must be good. And if you've ever set up a gambling tab account, or you've had a loan recently, or you've bought a phone from Optus, those use these same sort of biometrics check technology. It's really painless. I'll send a text message to your phone. All you need to do is scan your driver's license or passport, and then less than a minute later, it's over. Once you get that started, you go, okay, it's not that bad. So sending them that link, it'll also to have the name of your agency. So it's okay, this is not a scam. It's coming from Everywhere Real Estate, Andy Reid. Yep, I recognize that name and I recognize that brand. Then it's got in there why you have to do it. So the new legislation, and it references it. We then get them to accept the fees and charges first, so they confirm that they're agreeing to pay the fees, which is, again, it's only $6. It's not changing the world here. And then they undertake the check, and it's less than a minute later. So it's done pretty painlessly. So again, for agents that would like to see how that works, we can send them a link. They can see it. I can share it with you, Andy, to share on your socials. It's a really short 1 minute check. And then ultimately it's like, well, if that's actually not that hard. And that's 70, 80% of your AML done. Are they on the PEPs list or sanctions list? I know who I'm dealing with. And then you can check if they're they own the property or not, which is not that hard. So really going back to those three key drivers: transfer of title, KYC, the relationship, the asset. That's a big chunk of your AML sorted if you remember those three things.
Now, you mentioned that, like, we can get, for the $6, you can get the ID checked and all that sort of stuff. Within that $6, would that include the political persons of interest check and all that
Yep.
sort of stuff? All of that gets done in the one go.
All of that's in the one go. So it gets checked
So
off or done.
yeah, so if you say that that's 70, 80%, what's the remaining 20 that the agents need to be aware of?
Okay, so the remaining 20 goes back to the reasonable person test. So let's say, like we are now, we do an ID check on either one of us. I can't see if you're wearing a ankle bracelet that has to report to the police every six hours.
Not today.
Not today. I can't see if you've got a bag of cash So the
I
agent needs
wish,
to.
mate. Mate.
You never know. You never know, Andy. But it just that's the reasonable person bit. Like, is this a 21-year-old buying a $5 million home? Is that suspicious? Or this is the third home they bought off me in the last 30 days. So it's kind of that level of reasonable person that you go, okay, is there something suspicious about this transaction? Now, let's say that they sign a sale contract, but somebody else pays the deposit. It could be the bank of mum and dad that pay the deposit. That's actually not suspicious.
Mm.
But if Lucas McEntee signs a sale contract, but Xi Jinping pays the deposit, our system will flag that. And then you as the agent need to ask, okay, this is not right. Can I just ask what's the relationship between this person? If they start to stutter or hesitate, then you kind of think, okay, this may be a bit odd. So the majority of it we've digitized and automated. And to be honest, Andy, it's actually probably up to 95% because the majority of these transactions will be very vanilla. They'll be very straightforward. They'll be very easy to deal with. It's the 1 to 5% that you'll need to have your hat on and to think, is there something around this that I need to report or tell my responsible officer in my office that something's a bit fishy about this one?
Yeah, cool. Say for example, like in the reasonable person test is that sounds pretty straightforward, really. Um, you know, um, from an agent's perspective, though, um, we've got to be very careful that we don't get too complacent, but at the same time, we've got to be careful that we don't get again this authoritarian sort of we've got to do this and whatnot because society's getting fed up with authorities anyway, right? So we don't want to, we don't want to further inflate the disdain towards us as an industry because of this, right?
Yep.
If the reasonable person check, so say for example, if it is a something that you're not overly sure about, what would be a really nice light way for us to broach that subject?
That's a good question.
For example, because for example, we might not know. So for example, if a purchaser signs a contract day one, for example, but their deposit doesn't come in till 14 days later, and that comes in from another party, how do we manage that process? Because not all deposits, I mean, in fact, hardly any deposits come in straight away unless it's an auction. In a
Yep.
private sale environment, it could be subject to finance, and once finance approved, then it comes through.
Great question. So going back to, are you undertaking the transfer of a title? Yes. That's when you need to start doing your AML checks. Now, if the deposit comes in 10, 15 days later, that's still part of your AML compliance process. You just haven't completed it. So you need to commence it and then get started and ideally complete it within 15 days. But if additional information hasn't come to light yet for you to complete your check, then a reasonable person will be like, oh, I should just keep doing this, right?
Mm.
Now, a big thing is, there's two points here to mention. One is how to breach it, and the second one is what can you do to avoid these all difficult questions. So a big part of AML is understanding the source of wealth. Like, how did this person come into this money? And that can be quite a difficult question to ask. Like, how do you make your money, mate? Like, that's quite a sticky one.
Mm.
And so we've got a team that we can get to ask those harder questions as the law firm. So if you get something that's a flag, we can call up on behalf of the agent, just say, look, we're just calling through, we're just completing these AML checks. A few of these things have popped up that we just need to ask a few more questions on. And that's a big thing for the agent, that they don't actually have to ask those difficult questions. It's the lawyer's job. But the lawyer's going to do that. They can call you, right?
Mm.
And with agency settlements, so we process the deposit for the buyer. And because we plug into the banking network, we can see who made that payment. So it's actually one less question to ask, is this your money? Because we
Mm.
plug directly in, we can see it was them that paid it. And it's actually, I think a good segue into things what's actually suspicious activity. And one of the things is early release of deposits, or Section 27 in Victoria. Happens a lot, where it's agreed up front or it's agreed after exchange to release the deposit to the vendor. Now, because again, we're plugging in the banking network, if Andy Reid sold his home and then you've just given your bank details to the agent to pay the deposit back to you, but the bank record actually is using Ping, we'll go, hang on, that's not Andy Reid, but that's the bank account he's provided to us. It's a great way to launder money. When you sell a home, you can send the deposit to a third party to try to settle a debt or whatever it may be. So, so that's one of the ways that we can help track and determine, is this you and is this related to the vendor, in a way of refunding the 27 or refunding the deposit or passing the deposit on. I shouldn't say refund, but plugging into those things just to make as many of these questions digitized as possible. And then if they are red flagged, there's usually one key person in your office that deals with the sticky questions, not the end agent. And that person's called a responsible officer. So every entity that's registered with Austrac has to nominate a responsible officer, who's the person that's going to be in charge of our AML plan, our AML checks. And that person, in our view, is usually a trust account manager or the principal. And they're the ones that would ask those harder to deal with questions rather than the front end selling agent. They'd pass it on to somebody else, and that they can pass it on to us as a law firm or their RSO to help deal with those difficult ones.
Yeah, and I think it's something that business leaders need to make sure that our agents aren't feeling like they're under an undue stress because they feel that they have to take a responsibility around being the investigator.
Yep.
Being the person that asks these tricky questions. Because as a frontline agent, and to be fair, well, it's fair, you're more concerned with preserving relationship, preserving transaction, getting the deal done, right, and getting it put away. And as business owners, you don't want them to be detracted away from that, right? You don't want
Absolutely
them
correct.
to be distracted by this stuff to the point that they either don't bring deals together or miss a trick with regards to getting an extra however many $1,000 off a buyer or whatever in the negotiation process, right?
Yep.
And we've got to be very, very mindful of that as leaders, that we don't overburden those on the front line that are putting these deals together predominantly. It's very, very important, that, which is probably one of the reasons why they've made it a requirement for someone to be the registered sort of officer, shall we call it, for each branch. It's possibly, logistically, that could have been one of the reasons why they put that together, which it makes total sense.
Yep.
And from an agent, if you're an agent rep, right? So if you've not got your full license, you're just an agent. You are an agent rep. Then it's like a pay grade thing as well, right? There's a pay grade concern there too, right? There's a
Yeah,
lot of new
absolutely.
agents that'll be coming into the game that are like, man, I can't be, why should I have to do this? I'm just paid to get deals done and stuff. And interestingly as well, Lucas, right? And another trend that I've noticed recently is that there's been a number of older directors that have just gone, you know what, I can't be asked. This is just one bit of red tape too far.
Yeah,
Um,
I get that. And look, we've definitely seen a bit of consolidation in the space, especially some of the smaller offices that have gone, this is my time to retire and sell up.
mm,
And, we've definitely been part of some of those transactions. But our view too is, having already done it for so long, you just need to build it into your workflow. So we've really spent a lot of time, and this is part of the Riverstone Partners group, is that the agency portal has been designed to reduce administrative burden
mm,
and taking away hours and hours of work by automating as much as we can. So our AML requests, we can send them when a sale funder request is sent or a VPA payment request is sent, or we plug into real-time agent and we have a realtor integration. So all these sort of things you can use as trigger events to send the AML request automatically. And that then comes down to how the agents are framing the AML check in their listing presentation and with their sale contract. So
mm,
it's important to just have that framing done right. Every new listing, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, thank you very much for trusting me to give me this asset of yours to sell. As part of our new regulatory requirements, every real estate agent in Australia has to undertake some anti-money laundering checks. So you will receive an email or a text message from Agency AML who'll then be undertaking that check for us. And then the same with the buyer. So you just have to insert those little lines into your listing presentations, into your authorities, into your sale contract. So the sale contract, it'll be an additional flyer to say, look, if once this sale contract's been signed, we'll need to undertake an AML check. So when we send a request for the deposit, we automatically send a request out as well. Plus, you can manually send those requests. So if you have a scenario where you're carrying advertising, or you're not getting the deposit for 30 days, but you've started the transfer of title process, you can manually send those requests out as well. So that reduces a lot of the burden on the front end agent to remember to do it, plus the administration team, because it's just built into their workflow. And if they're using real-time agent, or they're using Sale Funder, or our sign product, or any of those things, we can automatically send those requests out, which takes away a lot of the hassle for agents having to remember to do it, because it's just done automatically. It's just about how to frame it to the person receiving this message, of that they have to undertake these checks now.
Yeah, and I think that just by having the ability to say, now me personally, I wouldn't broach the subject until I've got paperwork I'm getting ink on something,
Yep.
or the digital version of. I wouldn't be broaching it until then, because and then it turns from a hurdle that can prevent the process from coming into reality.
Yeah.
Um,
One thing though is that there's a number of AML businesses out there that are charging 60, 80, even $150 for a check. So if you've set yourself up properly, the $6 shows that this is the lowest straightforward check in the market, and we're not here to rip you off. We're not charging $60 or $80 or $100 for an AML check when the agent down the road is charging $6.
mm,
So our view is that you should probably breach it in the presentation, because what that does, it creates trust straight off the bat. Every
true.
real estate agent has to do this now. Every single agent in Australia. And I just want to let you know that we're not going to profiteer, and we've chosen the best one. These are the same guys the Big Four bank use. That's a pretty big resounding tick. Every single agent has to do this. And I don't know what somebody else is charging you, but some of them are 60, 80, $150 a check. And that's due to sponsorship agreements and all this sort of garbage that goes on in real estate. We've just gone, you know what? We just want to provide the best upfront service we can with the absolute best provider at the lowest possible price. And then everyone can share in everyone's success. So that $6 is like, that's pretty reasonable, right?
I actually withdraw my statement there. I actually think that being able to articulate the entire process and say it's all right. So basically, we'll get an authority. We need to get an authority done, and it's part of the paperwork section of an agenda that I put out to everybody. That I think if you just added this into that paperwork section in the agenda, so if you decide to go ahead. Whoever you go with, you're going to need to do an AML check. Now, thankfully, we've aligned ourselves with the big four banks, with the operator that looks after all the big four banks. So we know that it's going to be as good as it can be. And it's as quick and painless as a text message that you just got to click on it, put your
Perfect.
details in.
Yep,
And
you've absolutely
promise
framed it
well.
perfectly, Andy. That's exactly right. And I think that
Yeah, wicked.
and agents getting more upfront to it just goes back to that trust level. I'm trying to build trust to sign up this authority. So I may as well tell them now that they're going to have to do this. And by the way, it's the lowest cost provider, and it's the same provider the big four banks use, and it's $6. And then it might be a question they ask somebody else, and they go, well, why are you charging 60? Oh, that's what head office told me to do. I'm like, why is it 10 times more? And then every other question comes up for questioning, as you go, well, is this guy doing the best thing by me if he can't even pick the right AML provider? You
Now,
know,
one thing I wanted to ask with this, right, around the contract side of things. So we talked about authority. I wanted to ask about the contract. So say for example, if a buyer makes an offer in writing,
mhm,
and we go back to this transferring of title question, right?
yep.
Um, would we be prudent to start the AML check on the buyer while the negotiation's taking place, or do we only start it once the contract's agreed to? What would be your best advice on that?
Again, have you started to transfer a title? Now, you haven't started to transfer because you're busy negotiating, and that buyer might not go ahead with it.
Yeah,
So once you sign the sale contract, you've absolutely rock solid in doing it then, and then you've got 15 days on the buyer to do your AML checks.
yeah,
So
cool.
really, once they put pen to paper. because you could be negotiating with 5 different people. Now, a couple that do come up, they go, well, what if I've got a cooling off period? Can I wait? And they might pull out. Do I still do the check? Because well, the answer is still yes, because you started to transfer a title with that particular person. Now, that person might be using the cooling off period for whatever reason, or maybe they get cold feet, but that could be somebody that's put an offer in. Maybe they're paying the deposit in 60 days or 90 days, or they've negotiated all these, they're using a deposit bond, all these sort of things are going to come up. But it just goes down to, have I started to transfer a title? If the answer is yes, then you need to start thinking about AML. And you go back to KYC, relationship to the asset. They're the 3 biggest takeaways from today.
Okay, so even if we're sorry, to turn it loud. You forget how dark Melbourne gets. So essentially, so what we're saying here is, even though there may be a cooling off period, because we've entered into an agreed contract of sale, the process of a transfer of title has begun, and therefore we need to run that AML check. Now, what if the purchaser doesn't get it done and then calls off?
That too. So we have people that rescind agreements where they pay holding deposits. All those sort of things come up. But goes back to, again, doing a check. So if you've started the process, just start doing your AML check. There's no reason not to commence it. Every single one of those circumstances are exactly the same. Have you started the transfer of title? If the answer is yes, start doing your checks. Now, you've got 15 days to do it, but if that person pulls out and you haven't done your checks, if they didn't get around to it, all those sort of things will come up, of course. And that's where we go, look, just apply the reasonable person test. Was it suspicious? Was it just because they didn't get to it? Then sure, that should be okay. But you've just got to leave a note why. And they could say, look, they put a holding deposit down of $1,000. I sent them the check. A day later, they pulled out and they didn't do it. That's the note you would leave on the system. So
okay,
that's nothing to.
As long as we've got it, as long as we've got a documented explanation.
KYA, cover your ass. Just leave a note. And our system will leave a note. It'll say who left the note. The thing that's not talked about as often is that, being a reporting entity to AUSTRAC, you have to have an audit every 3 years. So every 3 years, an external auditor will come in to review your business and your AML practices. They will always find something no matter what. That's their job as auditors. But if you've actually documented everything you've done and left notes and recorded things, our system will digitally record quite a lot for you. So you can rely at least on that as a starting point, but everyone will need to still be signed off and there'll be a note. And if there's any flags, you'd leave a note. And in that scenario where they paid a holding deposit, I sent them the check, they pulled out and just took off, I never heard from them again, you'd literally leave that exact note in the system. So they go back, okay, a reasonable person, you tried to do the check, they didn't complete the transaction, they left, end of story, right? Is there anything suspicious here? You didn't know, it's just a deal that fell over. If it was, I sent them the check and they said, I'm never going to do this, see you later, I'm out of here, then you might need to report that one to AUSTRAC with as much information as you have. That's why it goes back to that reasonable person test. And a lot of front-end agents won't need to think about that. That's their responsible officer's job to determine if they do or don't report it. But, there's lots of scenarios going to come up. But, yeah, remembering those 3 key points from today is important.
Amazing. Love it. And in terms of awareness and whatnot, obviously, for any agent that's watching this and thinking about how they're going to put this together in terms of collateral, blah, 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 blah. My thoughts on it would be that once an authority is signed, you just put a AUSTRAC flyer with it, or have it as part of your authority on the back, kind of like a due diligence checklist type thing.
Correct.
And then you could, hopefully conveyancers will be across this, but hopefully they put in an AUSTRAC flyer within all the contracts now, which would make life a hell of a lot easier.
Unfortunately, conveyancers are behind the 8 ball. They're the least registered group at the moment. So there's still a lot of them to get it done.
In that case, gang, what we need to be doing is making sure that whether we are doing contracts through Realtor or DocuSign, whichever ones you're doing, let's just do our best to make sure that there is an additional page put on there for AUSTRAC to cover your ass. All right.
Correct. And it's not AusKick. That's something different. It's AUSTRAC. I had a few people
exactly.
go, "Oh, I've got my kid registered for AusKick. Is that enough?" I'm like, "No, that's not it."
So yeah, so make sure that you've covered your base, get something in there, make it sort of a standard part of your process. With those purchases, once they've entered into a contract, you say congratulations, and then as part of that congratulatory conversation, that's when you can actually get them excited and say, look, first you could actually use this as a good way to actually make sure that they stay in the game, right? And actually use it as a positive affirmation almost actually by saying, right, congratulations, that's amazing, you've got this, it's amazing that you've managed to get this deal together, that's so good. Let's start taking steps to really to making sure that this ends up in your hands, right? So first step is a very, very easy one, so don't this is the easiest one you're going to have to take, and it's the AML check. So we're going to send you a text, we're going to get a text message sent through to you, that's going to just ask you to put your ID in there, and this is going to be something that you will either already have done with your approvals for your loans, so it's no different to any of that. And the people that we use, Equifax, they're going to be the same people that if you're with a big four bank, they would have already seen your IDs and stuff anyway, so it won't take any more than 60 seconds.
That's it.
Um, and I think that using it as, this is the first step, and it's the easiest one to make. I think that'd be a really, really cool little opportunity to sort of start that ball of progress rolling before they start getting that buyer's remorse. I think that it could actually work out to be a really strong little positive reinforcement, to be honest,
Yep.
which is a good thing.
Yep. Excellent.
Which is a good thing. Now, Lucas, is there anything else that you think we need to cover off with all this AML stuff? Hopefully, for those that are watching, you are feeling a lot more calm and confident about it. Obviously, if you do want to speak to Lucas and his team, the agency portal, and all of the different various things, because they do more than just the AML checks, as Lucas pointed out before. They've been running Sales Funder, which is a vendor paid advertising finance part of his firm. But they are also now doing a whole bunch of different elements, including things like sale trust accounting as well. So I know that there's already been one in the gang that I've referred on to Lucas and his team that have gone, you know what, that makes my life so much easier. I can't be bothered with it. You do it. My life's, that's great for me. And then,
Yep.
so they can take care of things like sale trust accounting if you wanted to outsource that component. Obviously, though, and Lucas and I have spoken about this, haven't we, Lucas? How we've talked about how, we don't want this to then make people feel redundant, but there are other things that they can do that is equally as important. And what would you suggest?
Exactly. I think, the one thing with agency settlements, which is part of the portal, is we can collect a deposit, issue trust receipts, deal with Section 27s, and collect your commission in PEXA. So there's a lot of that we can do, but we've worked out that on average, that's about 190 minutes for every agency to do from the time they get to exchange to settlement, all those sort of steps. We've reduced that to 19 minutes, which means that that person has got a lot more time to start taking on the extra regulatory burden of AML. So we're taking away some time from their administrators that is just, to be honest, it's a waste of time. Just sending the same email over and over again to conveyancers, to buyers, all those sort of things they go through with your checklist. We've just digitized a lot of that. And then that person's usually quite savvy and shrewd. That's why they're the trust account manager. They're very diligent. So that's a perfect mindset for someone to be as a responsible officer. And then they can start spending that time running through the back end of these sign-offs of all these matters. Because remember, it's not just one listing, it's per person. So on average, you've got 2 buyers and 2 sellers, which means 4 checks and 4 sign-offs. So if each sign-off takes 20 minutes, plus the time it takes to send out, that's a couple of hours. So that couple of hours, is just, 20 minutes per sign-off, then plus a little bit more time setting the request, making sure they're done. So we're giving that time back to the office in removing the need for them to run the sales trust account. And then it's into a law society regulated Victorian, New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, WA. We've got a license to operate Australia wide. We collect the deposit, we process it, we send it to PEXA, we collect the commission. But all that time we give you back, you can now do on your AML checks, which just means that this upcoming regulatory requirement is going to be less of a burden for the smarter officers that have already made the jump to start working with us on that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the things that a lot of directors are going, I can't be bothered. This is just more work. It doesn't
Well,
have to be more work, right? It doesn't,
correct.
you know, you can still get this done in the same amount of time. But at the same time, make sure that you get everything done appropriately so you don't get yourself into any misdemeanors or any bother. One thing did want to find just as a final point though, man, is you did say that the powers that be with all of this, they're actually really cool and they'll want to work with you as long as you're showing like you're trying to make it work, right?
Yeah, look, our view is that Austrac, and not to say the ATO and ASIC aren't as good, Austrac are very good. They've gone really out of their way to produce these kits. They travelled the world to speak to other um, regulators in this space to figure out what they could have done better. So that is a big benefit of really going last. We've got a lot of that IP from other countries, and the starter kits are exactly that. Now they still can be confusing for somebody that's never looked at this sort of stuff before. There's
Mm,
28 forms per property. So we've digitized those forms, put them into our system just to help the industry get going. There's training, there's a lot of stuff out there. It's quite easy. And that's kind of like, look, guys, we've done as much as we can. If you don't register, we're just going to start finding people because we've literally handed it to you on a platter. Here it is, and that's but as an agency, as long as you're doing best endeavors, they don't expect perfection from day one, but they do expect compliance to kick in. And if you're doing everything you can to continually improve, then they're very good to deal with. They're not going to come in and dish out fines straight away. They're going to work with you, and that's our experience. So not to speak for Austrac here, but our own experience is that they're very straightforward, and a very approachable agency.
amazing. Lucas, mate, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to make sure that the links get across to everybody on all the different platforms. So wherever you are watching this from, you will be able to click onto the site that can get you. You just put your details in. Lucas and his team will reach out and get you on board ASAP. It's not something that you can mess about with anymore, though, gang. So you can't drag your heels on this or put it into the will do later pile. This has to be an A grade task, all right, where it's got to be a priority that you make sure happens ASAP. So, Lucas, thank you so much for your time, man. It's so greatly appreciated.
Thank you, mate.
Appreciate the time considering how much in demand you are at the minute because of all this sort of stuff. Nice to
Yeah,
feel wanted, all
this
right?
beard wasn't grey at the start of the year. It was a normal colour.
Yeah.
It's gone grey so much on. But it
Um,
is, mate. We're very flattered. The feedback's been amazing, and we're getting referrals all the time. We've got a lot of happy customers out there, and we're really changing the way this happens. And it's been a really humbling experience for us to all go through, but very, very satisfying as well.
Amazing, man. Look, thank you so much for all of your efforts in helping the game stay ahead. We really do appreciate it, man. Team, for those of you that are watching, whether you're on TikTok, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or if you want to watch this after the event, you're more than welcome to hit me up and I can send you a link to the full recording. Until next time, though, my friends, on behalf of Lucas and myself, and I will make sure that you can get a hold of Lucas as well. I'll put some relevant details in there so that you can reach out to his team. Take care, though, my friends. Stay safe, healthy, happy. On behalf of Lucas and myself, look after yourselves and get yourselves ready for July 1. Talk to you then.